questions as it relates to the OxCam program. Alrighty, so today we're going to talk about the interviewing process for medical school. But first, let's think about your journey, right? You guys have gone on an extremely long journey for multiple years, right? Starting off with some of those activities that you got involved with maybe after you graduated high school, volunteering, shadowing, leadership, and teaching. And then you went to school and did well in undergrad and or maybe completed a master's program to show that upward trajectory in your grades. You did some research, you took the MCAT and scored in a range that you felt comfortable with for your medical school applications. And you completed both the primary and secondary application to get to where you are today, which is interviewing or preparing to interview for medical school. So great job, everybody. Give yourselves a round of applause, pat on the back, because this is a very long and hard journey, and you've gone through a lot to get to this point. So you should be excited and proud of yourself. And so today, like I said, we're going to talk about the interview process, that next step, that light at the end of the tunnel, where some of you could probably see that light at the end of the tunnel. The last hurdle you have to get over is that interview. And so you could see that medical school light just shining at you, right? And so let's talk about how to get there. So today we're going to talk about the purpose of the interview. We're going to discuss what to do before you get an invitation, after you get an interview invitation, before you start interviewing, the interview itself, and a little bit about what to do after your interview. And so, as we get started, I want you to take a minute and think about why the interview is important. And please put any responses you have for this question in the chat, and maybe Dr. Artie or Dr. Siebel can read them aloud. Any responses in the chat?
Nope, not yet. So if you in the beginning, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A. And then also, again, if you would like to put a response to Dr. Hill's prompt, please put it in the chat about why you think the interview is important. So again, questions, please use the Q&A. Okay, so we do have some responses coming in. An interview allows AdCom to ask more about the applicant's narrative or specifics or why they want to attend medical school and what type of physician they want to become. To see how applicants' interpersonal skills will blossom through the clinical exposure rather than just students or just kind of, looking at students that are just good at writing or at stats. Someone said an interview shows the applicant's communication skills and the person behind the activities.
So awesome. All great answers. And yes, they're all examples of why the interview process is important, right? And so when you're thinking about the interview, remember that, well, we skipped a few things, that you are qualified for admission, at least from an academic standpoint and based upon the experiences that you've gotten involved with once you get that interview request, right? So you should genuinely be excited about being invited to get to do an interview, right? I know part of the interview process has a little bit of nerves in there too, but be excited. Get excited about the interview, right? And so as you all mentioned, the interview is to, further look at those personal qualities that you've written about throughout your application, right? So a lot of those competencies that are listed on the AAMC website, looking at your maturity, looking at your integrity, your honesty, who you are as a person outside of your writing, right? Also, the interview is a two-way street, right? So the school's looking at, are you a good fit for their school, their mission, their community? And you should be doing the same thing with the school. Is the good fit for you? What you're looking for in your training to become a physician or a physician scientist, right? And so you're looking for whether, so it's basically like you're both looking for, is this a good fit, right? And it's an opportunity for you to learn more about the school, its resources, its programs that it has to offer to make you successful in your career ambitions. And I'm going to touch upon this a bit later, but in the interview, you want to have a conversation with the person who's interviewing you. You need to be able to make that personal connection with your interviewer, even if you're online as well, okay? And so when thinking about what type of interview format you're going to have, we have some good resources. Well, we don't, but the AAMC has some great resources for you. One of them is MSAR. Since some of you have paid for this subscription, you might as well use it to its full capability. And so on MSAR, you can identify the interviewing information and determine and see when the schools that you've applied to are going to be sending out those invitations to begin the interview process, see what the interview format is going to be, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person, whether it's open application or closed application, right? All those things that you may want to know when you're planning and preparing for the interview. If your interview is going to be a multi-mini interview, all that is going to be listed here on the MSAR website under interview information. And you're also going to get a link to the website for the interview day of each school that has this information updated. The AAMC also has a free version of this information, and it's a PDF that they make available every year. And so it's basically MSAR report for applicants and advisors, and it's the interview procedures for 2027, which will be this year's interviewing schedule. And so it's going to give you a look at what the schools are offering. And so here I have a little crop out of one page in the book, and not even the full page because it doesn't fit on the slide, but here we have an example of 4 schools, right? The first school is giving, a standardized interview, fully virtual, semi-closed. And they've even defined for you what they mean by semi-closed so that you can get a sense of that they're looking at that qualitative and not quantitative information that they saw in your application, right? They're telling you when the interview invitations will be sent out, and they're giving you a bit more information and the typical interview day of what you can expect for an interview, right? And then we have another school, the University of Nevada, Reno School of Medicine, that's doing in-person interviews. And so this may be something that you want to know so that once you get that interview request, you can start planning out, how you're going to pay for that interview trip because it's in person, right? And then the Albany School of Medicine has multi-mini interviews. And so these are a type of interview that you're going to have to practice and get used to the format and structure of how to address those type of questions. And so you may want to know that in advance. And so please utilize either one of the resources. Like I said, the PDF is free. The link for the PDF is here on the slide. It's in the title of this slide. So please utilize it for the schools that you've applied to so you can start planning and preparing for the interview. And so before you get your interview invitations, you should be preparing for the interview, right? And when you think about preparing for the interviewers are going to ask you those same questions that you've been asking yourself throughout this process. Once you decided that you wanted to go to medical school or dental school or become a PA, right? You've been asking yourself, why did I choose this profession? How is this going to define my life goals, right? Why did I choose the classes? How are they going to support me and prepare me for a career in this field, right? Um, have I made an informed decision? Have I really tested my interests in this field? And if you're getting an interview invitation, yes, you have, right? You spent years doing volunteering, leadership, teaching, right? How have those informed the decision for you to go to medical school or some other health profession, right? Do you have a good heart, a good head? Are you prepared for the training that you're about to seek? And why specifically did you pick that school? Does it fit, right? Are you a good fit for that school? Do they fit the type of career trajectory that you see yourself having? And while you're pondering these questions as a part of, practicing before you get an interview, One of those days you're just gonna, look at your cell phone and something's gonna pop up and it's gonna say it's your interview invitation, right? And so genuinely you're gonna be extremely excited, which is great. Be excited, your first interview, right? You should be excited. But after that first interview, after you get that email, take a minute and breathe once you get it. But once after you get it, then you're going to want to think about what are your next steps, thinking, courtesy, logistical steps that you need to take care of, right? So you're going to respond to that email quickly and politely. And then you're also going to send, thank you for the invitation and start arranging the dates. So this is going to require you to look at your calendar, see what you have coming up and the confines of the dates that the administration or the admissions office have laid out for you, right? So that way that you can fit your interview in the schedules based upon the confines that they've listed for you, right? And then you're also going to want to take advantage of any and all interactive offerings that the schools have when it comes to interviewing or when it comes to virtual meetings that you can have before the interview, right? If they have, I know the University of Michigan has this night before on a Monday night where you come in the evening and you'll see it in a few slides where it's kind of like a social informational session and you're expected to be there, right? But other schools have optional options for like an on-campus visit, right? And if you're in the vicinity, you definitely want to take advantage of that, right? And so think about all the offerings that you can take advantage of that are going to prepare you for the interview. Okay, so before the interview, of course, you definitely want to read all of the instructions associated with the interview so you know what to expect. Think about what kind of attire you're going to wear, technology, and then practice. And practice doesn't just mean practice the questions. You're going to practice your body language, right? Showing that interest in what's going on. You're going to practice, your intonation and pitch and, you know, excuse me, and conveying that information with a smile on your face, right? And so you're going to be practicing a lot beforehand. But before we get there, let's think about reading those instructions. So here we have an example of maybe an email you might receive from this kid. This example is from a dental school. Can also be similar to what you see from a medical school, where they give you a list of information and, a little bit of details about, the total percentage of interviews that are given out based upon, the total applications and so on and so forth. But in the next paragraph or the one sentence paragraph or two sentence paragraph, you see that they do 20 to 30 participant sessions for an interview, and the interviews start at 8:45 a.m. and go to 3:15 in the afternoon, right? And so this is something that you're probably going to want to jot down, especially when they give you the dates. And so you're going to look, am I available all day on November 3rd or November 14th or 15th or whatever dates they have available for you to meet? And then you're going to respond to that email and let them know. You can also find instructions on the website, right? And so here, this is an example of the University of Michigan Medical School where they have a portal for applicants. You can get information. And they also have schedule at a glance, right? And so it tells you everything that's required. And so, like I said earlier, they have a Michigan Monday Night Live, which starts at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Mondays before the interview, where you get to chat with medical student ambassadors. So these are medical students, discuss with admissions staff, an opportunity to have fun and connect with their community, right? And then their interviews actually aren't until the following Thursday of that week, right? And they go from noon to 5. And so this is information that you want to jot down and note. And so reading all the instructions and information available will help you plan the logistics of your interview, right? And then starting to think about, what am I going to wear for my interview, right? What do I want to look like? Well, I want to present myself as a professional. And so make sure that you're presenting yourself as a professional. Have a nice, neat, clean, professional look. So business professional, this is, jacket, dress pants, dress or skirt, blazer, blouse, shirt, button-up shirt with a tie. And this is both for virtual and in person. You want to be dressed from head to toe, both virtual and in person. Professional but comfortable shoes, comfortable more so for those of you who will be in person because you have no idea how far you're going to be walking between buildings, right? And so you don't want to go home that evening after your 8-hour interview with blisters on your feet, right? So please, comfortable, professional looking shoes. Your feet will thank you for that later. Your hairstyle, modest, natural, professional hairstyles, and modest jewelry and minimal makeup, right? And so remember, for these interviews, even if they're virtual, do not go in there with shorts or pajama pants. You have no idea what the interviewers are going to ask to see, right? They may want to see you from head to toe. They may want to see the room that you're in from left to right, right? So keep the distractions to a minimum if possible, or eliminate them altogether, right? Okay. So, when it comes to those virtual interviews, you also want to be mindful of your background. Some schools do not allow interviewers to have that blurred background like you see in my background right now. And so you want to keep everything that's behind you minimal and modest, right? So the plainer the background, the better behind you, because you don't want anything distracting the interviewer. You want them focused on you and the words that you're saying. And when thinking about your background or the area that you're going to be interviewing you in, like I said previously, you don't know what the interviewer is going to ask to see. They may ask to see the room that you're sitting in and expect you to turn your camera around to show them the room. So you want to make sure that the room that you're interviewing in is well upkept and in a professional manner that represents what you want the committees to know about you, right? So make sure in a nice clean, non-distracting area. Technology-wise, and that's for those of you who are virtual. So when you're sitting down, swivel chairs, right? I know in person you may get sat in a swivel chair. Unfortunately, you can't control that in an in-person interview, but what you can control is the swerving that people like to do in some of these kind of computer chairs that are nice and comfy, right? You can't sit there and swerve during your interview, right? Whether it's in person or virtual. So try your best to if you're at home, you can choose to sit in this chair that's stationary to prevent you from swerving altogether. Lighting. The school wants to see your face, right? They want to see your bright, smiling face. So make sure you have adequate lighting so that they can see you. And a lot of schools will allow you to practice on foreign platforms that aren't like Zoom or Teams. And so if you get the opportunity to practice on the platform that they're going to be using to do the interview, make sure that you take that time to practice. Get informed about the platform, make sure you know where all the buttons are and how to troubleshoot if there's an issue. And microphones and headphones. I know a lot of us like to use that equipment during an interview. Schools may or may not allow that. And so you might want to check with your interviewer before using equipment such as that. Okay, body language. Body language is important when it comes to an interview, right? Are you leaning forward? Are you making eye contact? Are you showing that you're interested in this interview and that school through your body language, right? And as you can see here, a communication survey showed that body language is really an important part of communication, right? And so you show that involved, interested body language when it comes to your medical school interviews. And so, what am I talking about when I'm saying that? Walking and sitting, holding yourself tall, showing that confidence, right? Making eye contact with the person you're talking to. If you're in the room with them in person, if you're virtual, your eye contact is going to be staring at the camera, right? And so some of us need help remembering that, right? And so give yourself a focal point. Dr. Hardy always suggests put a picture of somebody who's near and dear right behind your camera so that way you're focusing right there where the camera lens is, right? If you prefer like a smiling face, somebody to give you a little bit of energy, maybe a smiley face sticker. Whatever works for you. If you're one of those people who needs to see the facial expressions you're making while you're talking, then put a mirror behind your camera. So that way you can focus in on the camera and make that eye contact with your interviewer, right? In person, firm handshake if possible, if that person is comfortable with shaking hands, right? Nice, firm, confident handshake, right? When they're talking to you, be engaged, lean forward, shake your head in agreement with things that they're saying that you agree with, right? Gestures and movement to help you show that enthusiasm for that conversation that you're having with that interviewer and interacting with your body language. And try your very best to keep some of those nervous habits and tics to a minimum, right? And then your voice. So, of course, volume is important. You want to make sure that the interviewer can hear you if you're sitting right next to them and or on camera. So if you know you're very soft spoken, you may need to speak up a little bit. And then there's also the inflections and intonations in your voice, right? Are you showing that enthusiasm, that excitement through the way your voice changes and fluctuates as you talk? So another note on body language here, Amy Cuddy gives a nice presentation on how your body language shapes who you are. And she also talks about the power pose, right? Which is kind of beneficial to you to do before an interview to help, get you over that nervous energy that starts the interview. So once you get the slides, please listen to this talk and hear what Amy says about body language. Alrighty. So now that we thought about the body language, our attire, the instructions, now we're ready to practice some of those questions. But what are the questions you're going to get asked? Well, when thinking about the questions, first think about knowing your application, because everything in your application is going to be fair game for a lot of those open note schools, right? And this is both the primary and secondary application, right? And so if you have an experience that you really highlighted in your application, maybe an interviewer is going to want to talk about that. Maybe if you had a low grade in one of your classes, an interviewer may want to discuss that, right? And so think about these experiences, what they are, and what you've learned from them, right? Because the interviewers are making sure that that person that they met in that application as they read through it is the person who showed up for the interview. So be prepared and know your application front to back. Alrighty, some of the common questions that you're going to get are the tell me about yourself, right? And they want to know exactly what it says. They want to know about you. So tell them some personal information, a little bit about your family, where you grew up, what your hobbies were. Tell them a story. Don't forget to mention your interest in medicine and maybe even consider giving them something memorable about you, right? But think about showing these as driven interests and not a list where you're just checking off boxes to tell them things that you did, okay? So tell them a story. They also may ask you why you want to be a physician, right? And think about those meaningful experiences that you pursued that led you to pursuing an MD, a DO, or an MD PhD, right? Be specific in who and why you want to help somebody or a community, right? They may ask you some behavioral questions, like tell me about a weakness you have, or tell me about a strength that you have. And you want to clearly state whatever that weakness or strength is. It's relevant, give its relevance, and give examples. State how you have mitigate or improved this weakness, or even how you solved it, right? Or they may ask you to tell them about a challenging situation. And here we generally suggest for you to use the STARS method, which is, the situation, what were you involved in? What was the task? What were you doing? What was the problem or challenge that occurred? And then we ask you to think about 3 action steps. So, 3 action steps, 3 things that you specifically did to overcome that challenge. And then what the result was from your action steps, what you learned from the situation about yourself, and how that's going to help you as you pursue medical school or or dental school or veterinarian school, whatever profession you're pursuing now. And then another common question is the why this school? Why are you choosing this school? You saw this on your secondary application. You may even see it in the interview, right? And so if you get the opportunity, attend any virtual sessions that are available prior to your interview, right? Visit the medical school website, look at their admissions page, look at their current students page, see what information you can gather from their resources that they're providing for you. If at all possible, meet with current students at the school, pick their brains about the program, right? Gain as much valuable insight about the school and program before you interview, right? So that way you can address, this question, thinking about focusing mostly on the school and what you learned about the school, right? And being specific, their mission and how their mission fits with you and your values, the curriculum and how the curriculum is going to fit with your learning style, the programs, right? If you're applying to a school and you're interested in global health, that school should have a global health program that meets your interest, right? And so you're going to want to show that and be specific with the names. If their global health program has a specific name, it could be dedicated to an alumni. You want to know the specific name of that program, the communities that they serve. Some schools have communities in urban areas, but they also have programs that are in rural health, right? And so if your interest is in rural health and the school has a program associated with that, you may also want to know the communities that they serve in rural locations, right? And the hospitals or clinics that are associated with that trajectory. So basically, you're showing that you're a good fit for that school and that you're well informed, right? You can also tell them about information that you obtained from other students. And then briefly, you can list some of the other information that we have here, like the location being a good fit for your personal interests, or that you have a support system nearby or in the vicinity, right? Because these are also important to the medical schools to know, but that shouldn't be the highlight of this answer. The highlight of this answer should mostly be focused on the school and what programs and activities they have to prepare you that fit the values and the career trajectory that you plan to have. So a little bit less common nowadays are the COVID-19 questions, but we do have some steps for you here to use if you do see one of those questions, like not blaming, but discussing the difficulties that you may have had through the pandemic, what you learned about yourself, what opportunities you got to take advantage of, and what did you learn about these different aspects, speaking of people, medicine, research, or healthcare. And then for you out there, MDs and MD PhDs, and even dental school and dentistry, here's some common additional questions that you may see throughout the interview process as you go through. And so, like I mentioned, you will be getting these slides. So you will have these questions to practice with once you receive the slides within 48 hours. So for those of you by request from last year's workshop, we have some MD PhD questions here as well for those of you who are applying to be physician scientists, more focused on that research aspect of the physician scientist role. So you can start thinking about these additional questions for MD PhD applicants as well. And then some specific questions for dental school, PA school, and veterinarian school for you to all take advantage of based upon what pathways you're interested in. And so as you continue to prepare for that upcoming interview, you want to be knowledgeable and be well read on the different current events and aspects of medical issues, right? Because you don't want to get a question like, what is a current issue in medicine that you see? And you don't have an answer for that question, right? Because you should be well read. You should know the current medical issues that are plaguing our society. And so keep up with those current events, policies that pertain to health, diseases of concern in other parts of the world, right? And how those diseases might alter, the US. Medical issues, right? So think about new research that's come to light, right? That may be able to help you as you become a physician, technologies and or medical or scientific thinking, right? Policies, the life of a doctor. Maybe you've read about a physician that you could speak to, right? And so think about these things. Be well read. We have tons of books for you here in the OIT that'll help you and benefit you as you start preparing for medical school. And in a moment, I'm going to list two of them. But first, I wanted you to have a list of some of the current issues that are out there. This is not an exhaustive list. And so you may have other current issues that you're thinking about that are on your mind that may not be on that list, right? And so they're still great issues to think about and will help you address some of the questions that you may get from medical school admissions. So start thinking about the current issues plaguing the medical facilities, like health insurance and all of that good stuff as you start planning and thinking about your interview questions and preparing for your interview. And as you're doing that, you may also want to stop by the OITE and pick up a couple of books that are going to help you with some of those medical ethics questions that you may see on the interview, right? Because you may get some questions on medical ethics and you want to be prepared for those questions. And so when you're thinking about that, think about maybe reading Medical Ethics by Tom Hope or Doing Right by Philip Hebert. So we have these available in the OIT library. You're welcome to come and check them out at your leisure. Okay, so as you're practicing questions that the interviewers are going to be asking you, you can also spend some time thinking about questions that you're going to ask those people that are going to be interviewing you, right? And so for some schools, you may have senior medical students as a part of the interview process. And so think about what kind of questions you may ask them, right? You're going to have faculty, physicians interviewing you, and you may be interacting even with administrators. So, what programmatic or personal questions might you have for them? And when you think about these questions, you start coming up with your list for the individual schools that you're have applied to. You may consider, verifying, and I would strongly encourage you to do this, verifying that you cannot easily find the answers to any of these questions on their website and the resources that they've made available to you, right? And so when you're thinking about what kind of questions you should prepare, think about questions that are going to help you pick that school over any other school, right? That you cannot easily find the answer to. Alrighty, it's interview day, right? What a day. How exciting, right? But the first thing that's probably going to get to you on interview day is your nerves, right? So you're very nervous, especially if it's your first medical school interview. What's it going to be like? What am I going to come across? I hope I know the answers to all the questions. All that good stuff is going to be running through your mind, right? That morning of that interview. But the first thing I want you to think about is how are you going to relax those nerves, right? How are you going to get into that good mind frame so that you can address those questions that are being asked to you? And so the first suggestion that I have, this may or may not work for you, figure out what works best for you, right? Is it mindful meditation and having a few minutes just before the interview to, meet that Zen and meditate, right? Or maybe it's reframing and transforming your thoughts, building that confidence in yourself. Some people do breathing exercise. The 4-7-8 breathing exercise works, and there's also the alternative nostril breathing. Other people like to do a power pose, standing in that Superman pose for a minute before the interview just to, get them energized enough to calm their nerves so they can get through those first few questions. And we have some resources when it comes to, thinking about that mindfulness and tackling those nerves listed here for you to review at your leisure. But now it's time for the interview. So what should you do? Well, of course, you're going to start off with arriving to that interview early, right? And so even if it's over Zoom or over Teams and online, you want to be there early, right? Make sure there's no glitches, no anything like that, right? Make sure you know where you're going. Getting there early will give you enough time to find the building, make sure your internet and all that good stuff is working properly. You have a great background and virtual standpoint, in person, getting to the location, finding the room that you're supposed to be meeting at. So get there early, right? And then the committee wants to meet you, right? So be yourself, be your authentic self. They want to meet the genuine person you are. So show them who you are. And you want to see the interviewer as your friend. Well, kind of, sort of, you want to see them as your friend, right? You want to see them as a person that you have something very important to share with, kind of like you would an old friend or an old colleague, right? That you're trying to connect with. So there's a personal sense to this, and then there's a professional sense, right? Because you want to make that personal connection with the person who's interviewing you, but you also want to do it in a professional manner. So see them kind of like a friend that you have something very important to share, and then have that conversation, right? Make that connection, right? Make that eye contact, use your gesturing, make that connection with the person that's interviewing you with so that you can leave them all warm and fuzzy inside. And to help you leave them all warm and fuzzy inside, you're going to want to show them some enthusiasm and some confidence in yourself and your abilities and your preparedness for the next step in your journey. And then, of course, smile. Be happy, enjoy yourself. You're on your interview. And remember that everything is a part of the interview. If there's a social event where, you're going to be mingling with some of the faculty and some of the current medical students, remember everything is part of the interview, even that social event. So you want to get involved, you want to be engaged, you want to be mingling, meeting people, networking, and talking, right? If it's a virtual social event on like Zoom, you want to be part of that discussion, be involved. Remember, they're still assessing you through this interview, through this social event. So you want to be engaging and be a part of the discussion. Okay, so on the interview day, once you get to the campus, if it's in person, turn your cell phone off. You won't need it, right? After you call mom and dad and let them know that you traveled safely to that campus and got there, turn the phone off until the interview is over. And leave your AirPods at home. You're not going to need them while you're waiting. No headphones while you're waiting. Just be there and be present. Even if you're on Teams, right? You don't need your cell phone during the interview. All you need is your laptop and no headphones, right? While you're waiting. No earbuds to listen to music while you're waiting. Just wait there quietly and patiently for the interviewer to come into the room. And keep in mind, you're still learning, right? And the missions know that you're still learning. So you're not expected to have all of the answers, right? And it's okay for you to not have all of the answers. So please be comfortable with that. And then last but not least, have fun. This is your interview. Remember that light at the end of the tunnel I was talking about earlier? You are almost there, right? You can see that light coming into view, right? And this is your last hurdle. So enjoy it. Show them that excitement because they want to know that you're genuinely excited to be there. Okay, so how many of you have actually taken a look at your school list and identified schools that you've applied to that have multi-mini interviews? And you can kind of just raise your hand at this point and let us know. Oh, awesome. We got a few people that have looked, so this is great. So I'm glad to hear it. Awesome. So this section of the talk is for you. The multi-mini interviews, right? And so what are they? Well, they're a series of short, structured interview stations that are looking at a lot of those soft skills that you have been working on and developing throughout your life, basically, right? And so they're looking at teamwork, communication, self awareness, maturity, critical thinking, ethics, all of that good stuff, right? And so, like I said, these are stations. So, whether they're in person or virtual, you're going to be at a station. And so for in person, you're going to walk up to a door and see a prompt. On Zoom, they're probably going to give you a prompt and tell you to enter a breakout room, right? Or have the prompt on the screen as you enter the breakout room. And when the assessor comes in, they're going to take the prompt down, right? And so basically, you're going to see prompts on ethical dilemmas. You may get acting or play roles, right? or role playing, you may get a scenario where they're asking you to critically analyze or think through a situation. You may get some knowledge checks on healthcare, situational judgment or behavioral tests or questions. And some schools even like to integrate traditional medical school questions into the mini interview format or the MMI format. And that's where you're going to get, the tell me about yourself or why this school or why you want to be a physician type questions, right? And so keep in mind that in some cases, the interviewer does not, the interviewer does not discuss anything, this does not enter in a discussion with you. But in some cases, you may be able to ask a question, or they may ask you a question, right? But in other cases, the interviewer is completely quiet after you've read the prompt. Okay, so how will you be scored? What are they judging you on? What are they basing your responses on? Well, they're looking for ethics and values, professionalism, your communication skills, your ability to engage in teamwork, your compassion and empathy, your cultural competency, as well as problem solving skills. And so all these should sound a bit familiar to all of you, as they're pretty much listed on the AAMC for pre-med competencies that medical schools are looking for, right? So they're looking for all the competencies that you've been writing about since you started your application. And so they're going to be assessing you on these competencies based on the scenario that you're addressing, right? And so some schools may have a rubric that looks similar to this. And we've modified this from a version that the University of Vermont School of Medicine uses. And so looking at, your demeanor, did you appear comfortable? Maybe you were comfortable with the process, or maybe you were highly confident in engaging with the process, right? Um, sorry. The desired attributes, are you showing the desired attributes, right? If it's a professionalism question, are you showing those professionalism skills, that communication skill, right? Are you just demonstrating what they're looking for, right? If you just demonstrate most of it, or you fully demonstrate it, or you don't demonstrate anything that they're looking for with the question, right? These are ways that they're going to assess you through the multi-mini interview process, right? And so think about these and think about, exactly what it is that they're looking for, right? Now it's time to think about how we address the question, right? Because there's a general structure when responding to an MMI scenario, right? And so you want to recapitulate, show your understanding of the scenario, identify the key factors, recognize the conflict, know who's involved with the conflict, right? So give your perspectives, acknowledge the differences in multiple viewpoints, right? So each person in the conflict may have their own perspective. So think about the different viewpoints or trajectories you can select based upon the prompt, right? And then address the question. What is your answer? What direction would you select? There might be a perfect solution, but you also need to weigh in the potential consequences of different actions, right? And clearly articulate your reasoning behind your proposed solution. And then the last step is going to be to summarize briefly, explain your reasoning, and be concise and clear. Okay, so now that we have a sense of how to go through the multi-mini interview process and answering the questions, let's try one, right? And so I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes to read this prompt. And then we're going to set up some breakout rooms. Maybe Gail, you can do that for me if you're still here. Um, for you to chat with a group of 4 people about this scenario and think about whether you can recapitulate the scenario. Can you tell all the perspectives? What answer you would pick and why? Okay, so take 2 minutes and read this scenario. You don't really need 2 minutes, but go ahead.
Is about 4 people okay for the breakout rooms?
Yep, perfect. Alrighty, I know that wasn't 2 minutes, but you don't actually need 2 minutes to read this. So now we're going to put you in breakout rooms for, let's say, about 7 minutes to kind of practice going through this type of question.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Would you like to put that prompt in the chat or?
Yeah, I can put it in the chat.
I'm gonna step out for a second. I will be back.
Okay.
And should I pause recording?
You don't have to. Yeah. If you can.